code of conduct. Utah's compulsory education law requires parents enroll their children in school. As caretakers of these children, LEAs have a legal and ethical obligation to create safe and healthy learning environments. The purpose of this training is to provide staff members with information to protect themselves and students from the consequences of failing to maintain appropriate boundaries between themselves and the student. This training addresses a wide range of behaviors and interactions between staff and students, from obviously unlawful or unethical interactions to less obvious boundary-blurring behaviors that undermine the professional staff-student relationship and can lead to misconduct or create the appearance of impropriety. School staff members are expected to provide students with appropriate guidance, direction, understanding, and support in a professional manner while acting within accepted standards of conduct. Establishing and maintaining appropriate personal boundaries for staff-student relationships are key to successfully achieving this. Whether driving in a bus, instructing in a classroom, passing in the hallway, assisting in an extracurricular activity, or serving meals in the cafeteria, appropriate personal boundaries between staff members and students must be maintained. Clearly identifying risky behaviors that may lead to inappropriate relationships is the first step in protecting students and staff. Every staff member must establish strong boundaries, stay within those boundaries, and intervene and report when observing others crossing boundaries. The negative consequences of a staff member violating the boundaries of a staff-student relationship are far-reaching. A student's perspective of appropriate staff-student relationships and trust in adults is compromised. Parent and community trust in school staff and the education system is damaged. Co-workers are impacted by the negative publicity resulting from a peer's inappropriate conduct. Liability for the resulting harm to a student may be placed on the organization and the staff member responsible for the misconduct. The staff member may face disciplinary action, termination from employment, and licensure action or criminal charges if applicable. Utah State Board of Education administrative rules require that every school district establish a code of conduct applicable to all district staff members. The term staff members includes professional staff, support staff, part-time, full-time, permanent, temporary, provisional, contract, and volunteers who spend substantial unsupervised time alone with students. The code of conduct requires every staff member avoid boundary violations with students, never subject a student to abuse, physical, mental, emotional, or sexual, communicate with students in a professional manner regardless of when, where, or how it takes place, including electronic communications and the use of social media. Never touch a student in a way that could reasonably make an objective student feel uncomfortable. Never discriminate against a student based on race, religion, gender, disability, national origin, gender identity, sexual orientation, or other protected class or characteristics. Never use or be under the influence of alcohol or illegal substances during work hours, at a school activity, or on school property. Never use tobacco products on school property or at school activities. Finally, staff members have a legal obligation to report suspected violations of this policy or of suspected abuse or neglect. Each of us sees the world in our own unique way. We interpret the events around us and the acts of others, and even our own actions, in light of our individual set of experiences. For example, one teacher accused of inappropriately touching students responded, "I didn't do anything wrong. I came from a really touchy-feely family. That's just how I am." A coworker, offended by and concerned with the teacher's actions, reported the employee's conduct to an administrator. The coworker obviously had a different standard of appropriate personal space between a staff member and a student. From the perspective of this employee, hands off entirely should have been the rule. So which interpretation of appropriate is correct? Where should the line be drawn? Some actions clearly identified in laws, rules, and policies. However, where a specific action is not clearly identified, Appropriate boundaries for personal interactions between staff and students must be based on common, acceptable, safe, healthy, and productive standards. Personal standards such as the "that's just how I was raised" standard must be set aside. In the school setting, the established code of conduct must be strictly adhered to, and the actions of every staff member will be judged by a reasonable education employee standard. In determining whether a person acted appropriately in a given situation, courts have adopted the reasonably prudent person standard. Increasingly, courts are moving toward the adoption of a standard for educators that requires them to provide a level of care based on factors like age, training, education, and experience. Put another way, under the reasonable education employee standard, courts ordinarily expect teachers and other school staff to provide a higher duty of care than the reasonable person who are not working in the public school system, but less than the degree of care that reasonable parents might perform. So the standard to measure conduct in the school setting will be that of what reasonable education employees would view as acceptable in the particular circumstance. The Code of Conduct requires all staff members to avoid boundary violations in their interactions with students. A boundary violation is any behavior that crosses the line verbally, physically, emotionally, or socially that a staff member must maintain between themselves and a student in order to ensure structure, security, and predictability in the educational environment. It is an act or omission not having a legitimate educational purpose and may potentially abuse the staff-student relationship. The Code of Conduct identifies specific behaviors which, absent extenuating circumstances, are boundary violations and should be avoided by school staff. With the variety of personalities and activities each school day, it would be impossible to list every situation that may arise. Identifying specific acts and behaviors is intended to help establish a baseline to assist in appropriately drawing lines for all staff and student interactions. In unique circumstances, the location of the boundary line may vary. Elementary versus secondary student, the type of class or activity, a student's unique disability, or even familial relationships between a staff member and student may impact whether specific conduct is acceptable. One example of specific circumstances that may impact the propriety of an action may be an occupational therapist serving a child with disabilities. The provider holds the child around the waist to steady while working to improve balance. This physical contact is appropriate. However, a high school English teacher would have no educational purpose in touching a student in the same way. Specific questions should be discussed with your supervisor. One area requiring careful consideration is meeting with students in isolation. Behaviors which may be considered boundary violations include isolated one-on-one interactions with students out of the line of sight of others, meeting with students in rooms with covered or blocked windows, sitting or riding alone in a vehicle with a student, or intentionally being alone with a student on campus or away from the school. Consciously consider location. If it is necessary to meet with an individual student, meet in a visible location. Keep the door open or request a coworker join you, perhaps even electronically if no other option exists. This protects both the employee and the student from the risk of false allegations. Giving a student preferential treatment is conduct which can raise concern and cross the line.
We work for the Washington County School District because we care about education and students. A caring, positive adult role model can have a positive, lasting impact on a student. Motivating students by encouraging them, rewarding them, and getting them involved shows that we care. However, giving preferential treatment to a specific student or group of students, providing gifts or special favors to individual students that are not offered or available to all students, or giving gifts with no educational purpose violates appropriate staff-student boundaries. Taking a student to lunch, inviting a student to your home, or regularly writing notes to a particular student crosses the boundaries of the appropriate staff-student relationship.
In some instances, it may be the student seeking the targeted attention. They may want the staff member to be a confidant, friend, or surrogate parent. although the student may be facing personal challenges and may need assistance when they seek attention beyond the parameters of the staff-student relationship. The staff member must establish clear boundaries. Be kind, but firm. For example, a student begins to hang out regularly after class and share the difficulties of divorcing parents. Things are so bad at home, the student asks if he could just go home with you. Couldn't he just text you tonight if things get really bad? An appropriate response may be, I'm concerned about you, and I'll do what I can to support you here at school. But I can't be your parent or friend. My place is to be your teacher or advisor or coach. It may be appropriate to refer the student to an administrator or guidance counselor for additional support. Referral to youth support programs, such as the Safe Utah app, may be appropriate. The Safe Utah Crisis Chat and Tip Line is a statewide service providing real-time crisis intervention to youth through live chat right from their smartphone. This service is staffed by licensed clinicians 24/7, providing supportive or crisis counseling, suicide prevention, and referral services. If a staff member believes that a student's well-being is at risk, state law requires the staff member to notify their parents without delay. Speak with your administrator before reaching out to a parent. In some cases, a staff member may be seeking attention from the student, fostering the relationship to fulfill the staff member's own needs. Staff members struggling with personal problems may find the attention and admiration bestowed by a student provides emotional comfort. Being the favorite teacher or coach that every student comes to brings a sense of empowerment. The staff member may not even realize the reasons behind their own actions. When interacting with students, staff members must maintain the integrity of the education setting and honor the trust of the students, parents, and the profession. Avoiding preferential treatment helps maintain appropriate staff-student relationships. Another type of boundary violation involves physical interactions with students. Touching a student in a way that makes a reasonably objective student uncomfortable, or unnecessary physical contact and unrelated to performance of professional responsibilities, violate the staff-student boundary. Examples include staff member-initiated frontal hugging, students sitting on a staff member's lap, staff members sitting on a student's lap, massaging a student, requesting or allowing a student to give a massage to a staff member, uninvited touching or unnecessary physical contact with a student. A teacher's aide in a high school asked a student to step away from her chair so that she could begin working at her computer. When the student wouldn't comply, the teacher's aide sat on the student's lap and began working at her computer. Although the student found the actions amusing, the conduct was unnecessary, inappropriate, and had no educational purpose. Other students in the class recognized the inappropriateness of the behavior and recorded the incident. A video of the interaction was posted on the internet, and the unprofessional conduct went viral. The negative impact went far beyond the staff-student relationship. Maintaining professional boundaries does not mean there can never be physical contact of any type between a staff member and a student. Examples of appropriate physical contact include pats on the back or shoulder, side hugs, handshakes, or high fives. In some instances, physical contact is permitted or required for implementation of a student's IEP or 504 plan, or assisting a student as part of fulfilling professional responsibilities. Outside of high fives and pats on the shoulders, when contact is required to assist a student, it's a good idea to ask permission and explain your intentions before initiating a necessary touch.
Staff members shall not subject a student to any form of physical, verbal, sexual, or mental abuse. Staff members are in a unique position of having daily access to students. If a staff member suspects a student is being subjected to abuse or is suffering from neglect, the staff member must report the suspicion to law enforcement or the Division of Child and Family Services. This includes when another staff member is the individual suspected of abusing the student. When making a report of suspected abuse, you should also inform your school administration of the suspicion and your report to law enforcement or DCFS.
Under Utah law, a person who makes a report of suspected abuse in good faith is immune from civil and criminal liability, which could otherwise arise from making the report, even if the allegations turn out to be unsubstantial. The next area of conduct requiring purposeful consideration is that of communication between staff members and students. Having a trusted adult in the education setting results in a more productive learning environment. Being friendly with students is appropriate. However, becoming their best friend is not. We are friendly. Of course we're friendly. But we're not friends with our students. Developing relationships with students is a natural outcome of regular interactions between individuals. In a caring educational environment, the personal lives of students become known through daily conversations with staff members. Staff members become familiar with the students' parents, siblings, home life, dreams, hopes, and failures. Students likewise get to know the adults who work with them. Students may learn about the staff member's marital status, children, and outside of school activities through appropriate daily interactions. In some cases, new teachers or young staff members may be just a few years older than the students. They may share common interests, similar musical tastes, and even an overlapping circle of friends. In situations like this, the staff member may see the students as peers. While developing personal relationships may foster a warm and trusting learning environment, staff members must diligently create clear boundaries to avoid becoming a student's friend, surrogate parent, confidant, or sexual interest. Staff members must maintain professional relationships with students in all interactions, whether on or off duty and on or off school property, including in the use of electronic communications and social media. Excessive informal and social involvement with individual students is unprofessional and not compatible with appropriate staff-student relationships. Behaviors that may be seen as crossing the line include engaging in inappropriate or unprofessional contact outside of educational program activities, taking photographs of individual students for a non-educational purpose or use, exchanging personal email or phone numbers for a non-educational purpose or use, engaging in one-on-one private communication with a student unrelated to coursework or official school matters, regardless of the method of communication. Text or email between a staff member and student should never be used for communications of a personal nature. Social networking should only be used for instructional purposes. Anything posted by a staff member must follow all student privacy laws as well as LEA policy. Additional communications which cross the boundaries of appropriate staff-student relationships include seeking emotional involvement with a student for the staff member's benefit, counseling a student if you are not a school counselor or school psychologist about non-school or personal issues without written parent permission, becoming involved with the student so that a reasonable person may suspect inappropriate behavior, or staff members discussing personal problems or intimate issues with the student. If the student initiates the behavior beyond professional boundaries, it is the staff member's responsibility to stop the behavior and clearly identify appropriate boundaries for the student. If the student persists, inform and seek the involvement of parents and administration. Sexual conduct of any kind between a staff member and a student is strictly prohibited. The age of the student is irrelevant. The prohibitions apply whether the student is 8 or 18. Likewise, consent is irrelevant. A student's consent to participate in sexual conduct does not make it any more acceptable. A careful examination of several high-profile incidents of school staff becoming sexually involved with students reveals that egregious violations between a staff member and a student began with smaller boundary violations. One after another, repeated violations blur the boundary. Inappropriate conversations leading to inappropriate touches, leading to sexual misconduct.
Put in handcuffs, charged with sexual abuse after allegedly carrying on a secret relationship with one of her students.
Ms. Mora, did you have an inappropriate relationship with a 13-year-old boy, one of your students?
For this reason, the Code of Conduct prohibits any sexual conduct, not just physical conduct of a sexual nature with students. Sexual conduct, even in jest, is clearly a boundary violation. This includes, but is not limited to, telling risque jokes or stories to or in the presence of a student, making or adding to sexually inappropriate comments, sharing with or allowing a student to view sexually explicit, pornographic, lewd, or otherwise inappropriate images, photographs, or communications in any format. Grooming. Grooming generally involves behaviors that in and of themselves may appear innocent. It involves adults engaging in increasingly invasive boundary violations with a student to blur the line between appropriate and inappropriate contact, ultimately leading to sexual misconduct. Grooming may also include many of the boundary violations previously discussed. Seemingly harmless physical contact or flattering verbal comments directed toward the student can become invasive, so that over time, physical contact and inappropriate remarks begin to seem normal. By a steady series of small encroachments, a perpetrator progressively breaks down a child's normal personal boundaries to more easily commit sexual misconduct. Staff members must avoid activities which may be viewed as grooming behaviors. Some activities that may seem innocent from a staff member's perspective can be perceived as emotional flirtation or sexual insinuation from a student's or parent's point of view. Avoid situations that could prompt suspicion by parents, students, colleagues, or school leaders. All behaviors qualifying as sexual abuse or battery are strictly prohibited. The definition of sexual battery includes touching, whether or not through clothing and regardless of gender, a person's genital area, buttocks, female breasts, or otherwise taking indecent liberties. Likewise, encouraging or allowing a student to engage in behaviors towards you as a staff member is prohibited. There may even be times when the student is the one who initiates the inappropriate conduct. However, a student's consent or even initiation of sexual conduct does not make it acceptable. It is the responsibility of the staff member to stop the behavior. Firmly tell the student the behavior is unacceptable and not to do it again. Involve administration and parents if necessary to establish appropriate boundaries.
A staff member may not discriminate against a student based on a protected class. For the student population, protected classes are defined by characteristics such as gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability. Staff members must also report known violations of this code of conduct. Known violations of boundary violations, inappropriate physical or sexual conduct, inappropriate communication, discriminatory conduct, and any issues related to controlled substances.
Staff members may gain knowledge of violations through personal observation, conversations with students or colleagues, or parents, or from overhearing the conversations of others. Follow the reporting procedures established by your LEA. If you are unaware of the process, report to your supervisor or administrator. If your supervisor or administrator is involved in the violation, report to the district office. Even well-meaning staff members intent on doing good and caring for students often don't see the risks involved before it's too late. That is why it is critical to establish appropriate boundaries and maintain them. An adult providing support during difficult times can help a student avoid academic failure and other problems. All interactions between staff and students must occur within acceptable boundaries of the professional staff-student relationship. If you have further questions, please contact your supervisor or administrator.